We're in a theme called Stories of the Path. And in this theme, we're using stories to illustrate what's called the 5 aspects of spiritual life. These 5 aspects chart the way that a human being grows psychologically and spiritually. And the first of those 2 aspects are like the foundations. So they're integration and positive emotion. And the last 4 weeks, we've been focusing on integration. So yeah, the process of getting to know all the different aspects of ourselves, all the scattered, sometimes competing elements of our personality, and gradually gathering all of that around our core values. And the reason that we do that is so that we become a more unified, more whole individual with all our energies moving in the same direction, so that we can follow through on intentions and realize our aspirations. And the next few weeks, we'll be moving on to positive emotion. So that's the process of getting our deeper emotions on board, educating those emotions, and becoming a positively connected individual. And tonight's talk is a bit of a bridge between those 2 aspects. So we're starting with integration, and the meditation practice that's most closely associated with integration is the mindfulness of breathing. So as you know, with the mindfulness of breathing, we use the breathing body as an anchor around which all of those disparate elements can come together. And usually people think of mindfulness as something like being in the present moment, being with experience here and now in the present moment. And that is an important part of mindfulness, but it's not the full story. Mindfulness also involves waking up to the significance of experience. And to do that involves awareness of the past and the future too. So the word that's translated as mindfulness in the mindfulness of breathing is sati. And literally, sati means memory or recollection. So our past experience influences how we interpret our present experience. It gives our experience a particular flavor, you could say. So sometimes a bitter flavor, sometimes a sweet flavor, sometimes neutral flavor. So 3 different people might be in exactly the same circumstances, but the flavor of their experience may be very different depending on what they bring to it from their past. So integration doesn't just happen in this moment. Integration happens through time. And tonight's story is all about integrating the past into the present. And so the story I'm going to be telling, it's a short story by Charles Dickens. It's a lesser known short story. It's not the one you heard at Christmas. And the story is called The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain. So I have my storybook, so I'll tell you the story. So once upon a time, there was a chemist. And this chemist taught at a college in no particular place. And the chemist had grafted for years and years, acquiring knowledge, climbing the career ladder. But anyone who saw him could tell you that he was a haunted man. They could tell you because of his hollow cheeks, his sunken eyes. He had tangled hair like seaweed, and he had a haunted look on his face, as though he was watching shadows wandering through his mind. So we first meet the chemist on a winter's evening in his quarters. And he's seated in his gloomy room in front of a fire, poking the embers. And the story goes, as the gloom and shadow thickened behind him, it slowly took the form of an appalling copy of himself, his phantom twin. And the chemist said, I see you in the fire. I hear you in the wind. I sense you in the stillness of the night. So then what happens is the chemist and his phantom twin take it in turns to speak about the chemist's life, and slowly the chemist's past comes out into the open, and it's a sad tale. So his mother had died when he was a young boy, and then his father had remarried, and after the remarriage had neglected his son. But he'd found comfort. He'd found comfort in a trusted friend, a good friend, and in his loving sister. And then when he was a bit older, he fell in love. And he dreamt, he had high hopes for a brighter future, married to this woman. But then the woman of his dreams ran off with his best friend. His universe was shattered. And his response to that was to drive himself hard to become a famous chemist, to become successful. He put all of his energies into that. But then tragedy struck again. His beloved sister passed away. So at this point, the chemist says, "These painful memories of sorrows and wrongs and troubles are a curse. If I could forget them, I would." And at this point, the phantom offers him a gift. It's the gift of the power to cancel out his past, to forget all the intertwisted chains of feelings associated with his memories. And he urges the chemist, decide quickly, decide and it will be done. Quickly mulling it over, the chemist agrees, and the phantom gives him the gift. But there was a hitch. There was a bargain to be made, because from that point, whoever the chemist came into contact with would also receive this gift of forgetting. The phantom said, "All human beings have their sorrows. Who would not forget them and be happier for it?" At this point, the phantom melted away into the background. The chemist suddenly felt lost. He felt afraid. He felt alone, alone, alone. He felt a stranger to himself. And then he was startled by a noise. So he went through to the next room, and what he saw repelled him. He came across a savage child. A child, human on the outside, beast on the inside. A child that had never been a child. So where previously the chemist would have felt tenderness and empathy and compassion, now he just felt coldness and disgust, and he chased that child out of the house like a rat. So the next day, the chemist went to visit a sick student of the college that he'd heard about. And that chemist was lodging with a very poor family called the Tettersbys, very classic Dickens name, the Tettersbys, Mr. and Mrs. Tettersby and their 7 children. They were very poor, they lived a really hard life, but they were bound together as a family by their shared struggles, their shared concerns for the children, their affection for each other. And as the chemist walked past them through the house, unknowingly he transferred the gift to them. So as he was climbing the stairs to visit the student, he turned round and he saw the Tettersbys had started quarrelling and bickering. Before, where there'd been affection, now there was criticism. Before, where there had been gratitude, now there was resentment. Before, enthusiasm, now apathy. Before, shared concern, now self-concern. So the chemist quickly ran up the stairs and he entered the student's room, the room of the sick student. And while talking to him, again, unknowingly, he transferred the gift to the student. So at this moment, the chemist heard the voice of his housekeeper. His housekeeper was called Millie Swidger. Millie was climbing the stairs. So Millie was renowned for being pure-hearted and kind. She took care of all the students in the college. She would take children off the streets into her own home. And the chemist was determined that above anybody, he didn't want to infect her. He didn't want to pass this gift on to her, so he hid. So Millie entered the room and, as usual, started nursing the student. To her surprise, much out of character, the student arrogantly pushed her away. He'd become like a petulant child, arrogant, impatient, ungrateful, and suspicious. So he accused Millie. He said, "The only reason you're looking after me is so that in the future I'll be obliged to you." Quite cruel words. So Millie left the room feeling quite stung, and the student cried out to the chemist, "What have you done to me? Give me back to myself." The chemist was horrified at this turn of events, and he ran home. And as soon as he got home, he found the savage child was in his house again, fast asleep. So he went to have a closer look at this child, this half-human, half-beast. And what he saw horrified him, because in the child's face, he saw the likeness of his own face. He cried out, "Phantom, come back and haunt me. I can see now that no memories can be lost without a blank being made in man's moral universe." So the phantom answered the call. He reappeared, and he explained to the chemist who this savage child was. He said, "This savage child is the perfect illustration of what it was your choice to be, the perfect example of what you wanted to become." And at that moment, the chemist's disgust of the child dissolved, and it was replaced by compassion. And he put a blanket over the child and sat next to him. At that moment, it says in the story, the sun rose red and the horizon brightened. So from that moment in the story, the gift, which of course is not a gift but a curse, began to wear off. And with the help of kind-hearted Millie, who he'd managed not to infect, the curse was lifted gradually from all those who'd been affected. So Mr. and Mrs. Tettersby apologized to each other profusely, forgave each other, and their affection for each other was restored. The 6 students' gratitude towards Millie was restored. The chemist realized that through losing all of his painful memories, he'd lost everything that was good about himself too. So he started to feel compassion for himself, for all that he'd lost in his life. He empathized with himself. He started to take much more interest in those around him. And he sought out that old friend who'd betrayed him by running off with his lover. That man was now a broken man, stricken with remorse, but the chemist did his best to forgive him and to help him. So then the story, in typical Charles Dickens fashion, ends with a big feast and ends with a sort of a close-up in writing of a portrait on the wall, underneath which is written, "Lord, keep my memory green." And you may notice, if your screen is not too small, behind the chair on the left, there is a child peeking out from behind that chair, and that is the savage child. So it's a savage child, still nervous, still wounded, but gradually being nurtured into that fellowship. So a concluding feast with all the characters of the story. So that is the story of the haunted man and the ghost bargain. Okay, so where does that all fit in with our theme, and what does this story illustrate to us? So the first thing that is quite obvious is that the chemist is haunted by painful memories, and he's got a really strong urge to bury them and move on with his life. So when I first read this, which was the reason I read this, it's mentioned by Sangharakshita in the book called Living with Awareness, in the chapter on sati, on remembering. And when I first read it, it did remind me of myself when I arrived at the Buddhist center. Might not have been so physically obvious to people, but internally, I was a haunted man. And for me, a lot of the painful memories were in the quite recent past. And my response was similar to the chemist. So I just threw myself in to meditation, study, working in the evolution shop, making friends, ordination training, just set on making progress in the spiritual life. So when people come along to the Buddhist center, and this might ring true with you, it might not, taking up Buddhist practice can often represent a fresh start, almost like year zero. Set your sights on the future. Let's just let the past be the past. Let's go for this. And it's very tempting to cut off from the past. But if we try to keep painful feelings buried, my experience is they become baggage. All that pain about bad memories, all those resentments about wrong done to you, all those regrets about wrongs that you've done, and they lurk in the darkness, secretly and silently, growing stronger, more destructive. And sometimes we can project that out onto others as blame. And then, so what are the effects of this gift or this curse of forgetting? Well, all the characters in the story who are affected, they start to disintegrate as moral beings. They forget about what they're about. They lose their sense of themselves, a sense of their interests, their sense of purpose, their core values. They become cold and selfish and just reacting at the moment, in the present moment. Whatever comes in front of them, react to that. So they forget how to empathize. They forget how to forgive. They forget how to be grateful. So why are they better off without the gift? So early in the story, the phantom tries to persuade the chemist, surely people will be happier if they forget about all these sorrows and troubles. They're better off. They're better off without it, because so much of what is good in them is bound up with their past. All the lessons they've learned, all the resources they've built up during tough times, all the friendships they've forged during difficulties. Often the worst events of our past help us to grow into more rounded, more integrated, actually more fully human individuals. And I know that from experience. The best of us and the worst of us come from the same roots, and they're intertwined. So if you cut off from your worst memories, you're also cutting off from your highest potential, actually. And out of this integration, this becoming more rounded, more integrated, more fully human individuals, comes positive emotion. So we can feel for others' pain because we can remember what it's like to feel pain and grief. We remember the wrongs that we've done, and that helps us to become more able to forgive others for their imperfections. We remember all those who've helped us, and therefore experience gratitude. So it's actually recollection of the past, an ability to learn from the past that supports our ethical life. And of course, the person of the future, so Maitrīdāsa 2 years down the line, will be looking back at Maitrīdāsa now and learning from my mistakes and my experiences. So integration, yeah, it's something that happens through time, not just in the present moment. So Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna, he says quite poetically that it's as if there's a pattern or a blueprint behind everything that we do. He says it's as though our life is about weaving a huge carpet. And all we can see is the bit we're working on now, this leaf or this flower. But the task is to discover the overall picture that's running through the carpet, the overall pattern. He says your life, with all its ups and downs, reveals yourself to yourself as you live it. So I really like that sort of life as a process of discovery, a process of gradually discovering the pattern of your life. Yeah, and final question that I sort of came out of the story with, well, it's how is the curse lifted? Yeah, how is that curse lifted? And the single strongest image for me in the story is the chemist finally taking care of this savage child, which has a face mysteriously like his own. So in doing that, the chemist is starting to make peace with his past. He's learning to have kindness and sympathy for his former self, for all that has happened in the past. He's realizing that he has to do his best, whatever he can, to absorb those experiences and use them to support his efforts to grow, support his efforts to become more positively connected with others. So how can we actually do that in practice? How can we really face our past, make peace with it, and absorb the lessons from the past? So I'm going to finish the talk talking through some of the things I've tried, and there might be things you've tried. You might have other ones, and it's probably the thing you're most likely to talk about in the group. So just while I'm going through my efforts to make peace with my past, you might just come up with your own as well. So before I came to the Buddhist Center, before I'd ever knew anything about Buddhism, I benefited a lot from receiving therapy 2 times in my life, for quite long periods. And that can be a really important part of the process. And I really respect those who have the courage to enter that process. But there are other things I have done since I've become a Buddhist, that therapy is not the only way we can do it. So a couple of years after I started practicing at the Buddhist Center, I started, once I built up enough trust and just sort of relaxed a bit, I started to find people that I could open up with about my life, about my past. And one of the key people that I did that with was Bojanaga. So there was quite a period of time where once a week me and Bojanaga would meet up and we just talk about our lives. And part of that involved expressing regrets for things that, for wrongdoings in the past. In talking about my life, it became clearer, like, was this skillful? Wasn't this skillful? Were people affected by this? But then also talking about a lot of achievements and good memories. So yeah, it was really important to me to sort of have a partner in crime to open up with on a regular basis. And there have been many others. Yeah, so something we can have the opportunity to do sometimes is tell our life story. I think mine's coming up soon in the community. And that can be a really good opportunity to say as much about your past as you're comfortable to say, given the group of people you're talking to. And yeah, it's interesting that the telling of your life story does clarify. It's sort of interesting. So I've told my life story many times and it's slightly different each time and different emphases. And yeah, so the telling of a life story can be a really good way of not only sharing the past, but actually discovering the significance of your past. Another thing I've done is when I've realized that intentionally or unintentionally I've hurt people, I've tried to apologize to them. Now that hasn't always gone well, I have to be honest. Sometimes it really disarms people. Sometimes people haven't taken it well. But I'm sort of still glad that I've done it, because I know that knowing that I've tried to make amends, to apologize, helps me to move forward. Another thing is when I've recognized that people have helped me in the past, I've gone out of my way to thank them and rejoice in them. That's probably the strongest example for me, and possibly for a lot of people, was towards my parents. So I had a whole phase of my life where I was quite focused on particular ways that I felt my parents hadn't been good enough and had let me down. And then I was on a retreat, and the penny really dropped, like how out of perspective I'd got that, and just these reflections on how much my parents had given me materially, emotionally, spiritually, ethically, all sorts of ways. And I wrote to them and I thanked them, and they were slightly embarrassed, but it was really good for our relationships. And I think from that point was the start of me relating to my parents as an adult, an integrated adult human being. Another thing that I have done is so people that have done me wrong, or I feel have done me wrong, I've tried to forgive them. So that might not, it's very rarely a case of going up to someone and using the words, "I forgive you," because that's a bit presumptuous. But what I try to do is just indicate in some way that I'm prepared to stay in connection, that I'm prepared to start letting go, and to, in a way, acknowledge that they can change just as I can change, and our relationship can change. There's been a few people in my life that I've reconnected with them since I've become a Buddhist. And they're people who I think felt left behind. I think this is quite common. So we can come to the Buddhist Center, we can get really excited, we can sort of throw ourselves into the Sangha, and we might sort of still be in touch with old friends, but somehow they feel left behind. We're changing, and we're really enthusiastic about something new, which they're not a part of. They can feel left behind. So yeah, I've made efforts to go back and reconnect with people, and make sure that I've sort of honoured their role in my life in the past. So in meditation, from time to time, I put my former self into the Metta Bhavana. Sometimes I do that, I sort of come up with an image which somehow symbolizes or captures me in the past. So I remember one where I sent metta to myself as a cowering hamster in a little hole. Yeah. So, hey, amazing the things you do when you become a Buddhist. And, yeah, and just really sort of connecting empathically with my former self, just sitting with who I was, everything that I went through, forgiving things that I got wrong. You know, I did my best in the conditions that I had, and just give my former self a break sometimes. And there's one occasion where I decided to write to my former self. So I wrote a letter to my former self where I explicitly thanked little Maitrīdāsa. I forgave, I empathized. I wrote something like, You did really well. You did your best. You got me here. Now sort of rest in peace and I'll take it from here. It was something like that. Yeah. And then the last one's really simple, actually. So getting the old photos out, going through them, listening to old music that I used to listen to in the past, but somehow stopped listening to. So occasionally I get my old hip hop CDs out, which I had a period where I thought it was wrong to listen to hip hop because they swear. And just listen to it as a way of connecting with my past. Rereading significant novels which really meant a lot to me when I was a teenager, particularly. And doing things that I used to enjoy, but somehow just stopped doing. Partly maybe because of some wrong idea that they didn't fit into this new, shiny spiritual life, or maybe I just replaced them with other activities. So an example for that for me is, earlier in my life, I spent a lot of time in India, and most of the time was speaking Bengali. So occasionally I just get my old Bengali books out and I read Bengali or listen to Bengali music or watch a Bengali film, and that really just sort of takes me back into that former me. So just winding up now. So the integrating the past in ways like these and other ways just gives us the confidence to move on. It gives us the confidence to move on as more rounded, more mature human beings. The more we can make peace with our own past, I think the better we become at making peace with others, and the better we become at helping other people to make peace with their pasts. So all of our past experience, pleasant and unpleasant, it's part of who we are now. The best of us and the worst of us. So somehow we need to find ways of, occasionally, of just sort of turning back and looking at our past, reconnecting with it. That's how we become fully formed human individuals. So we need to retrieve and integrate and absorb all that's been sort of scattered and left behind us on the path. And if we do that, then it gives us the confidence to move towards a more expansive future with less of a sense of burden, of baggage, more freedom, and a relish to tackle the challenges ahead. Thank you.